Welcome to Reels on the Rocks, the show where your hosts Whiskey and Sweet Tea discuss film from the unpretentious perspective. Come one, come all to the Found Footage Film Festival. Screening first is the celebrated indie film Creep. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and as always, please be advised that spoilers are ahead.
So, Whiskey, did you take care of that little peach fuzz problem we talked about?
Uh, we're still working on it.
I literally had no idea what line to pull for this episode, so I was like, let's just go with peach fuzz.
That's a good question. Yeah, now that I'm thinking of it.
But hello, listeners. Welcome back.
Welcome.
Yes, this is our... I don't know what to call this. I guess found footage is the best way to describe it. Found footage
Film Fest.
Okay, there we go. That's the official name, Found Footage Film Fest. We love alliteration. We love our alliteration kings. So Found Footage Film Fest it is. So so we have an interesting movie. I actually saw this movie I think shortly after it came out. It's about Go ahead.
Yeah, I remember it. I mean, part of the reason I thought of doing a found footage film fest is because I remember... I don't think you ever, straight up said you think it's a bad genre, but I remember you being a little dismissive of found footage films, thinking they don't tend to have... they don't tend to be as good. And I will say that there's a lot of bad ones. It's very easy to make one, so there's a lot of very crappy filmmakers who try to do it. I remember back in the early days of Netflix, they had a lot of really good movies, but they also had some shockingly bad ones. It's kind of like nowadays you see a lot of really bad straight to video movies on Amazon and stuff.
Right.
Shudder, I think, has some, but yeah, it's one of those things. I think it's a good litmus test for how good a director is.
Yeah.
And I thought it'd be fun to talk about because I feel like it's a subgenre that you have not been fond of in the past.
Yes, I have not been fond of it. There's practical reasons for that, but we'll get into that in a minute. But before we get down into that, let's talk about... I have a little subtopic to talk about today. As you know, Netflix recently released a series called The Three Body Problem.
Woot woot.
So supposedly this is based off of a celebrated Chinese work. It's a work of sci-fi fiction. Have you heard of this, before the Netflix series? Because you're more storied.
Oh, yeah. So, if anyone couldn't tell from the previous episode where I was talking about, and I think I mispronounced it actually, but I don't really care because the guy sounds like a jerk, but Jodorowsky's Dune. But I'm a bit of a sci-fi guy, and back when I saw the first Dune film and was reading the book and got super into the lore, I discovered a sci-fi book YouTuber that I got really into. His name's Quinn's Ideas, or his channel is. And because of him, he's talked about a bunch of book series that he's really into, and I've been aware of the three body problem. He talks about the three body problem so frequently. When I logged on to Netflix and saw there was a series, I was like, wait, what? I didn't know. The funny thing is, I think Quinn had even said there was a series coming out, and I just forgot. So as soon as I saw that, I binged it in two sittings. So I have finished the show. I'm not sure what the topic regarding the show is, but at least as far as someone seeing the show, I can at least, speak on that. So what's the topic?
So the topic is, I actually came across this article yesterday on CNN. It's by Nectar Gone, and this is a wild ride. Okay. It's called "A Billionaire Helped Bring Three Body Problem to Netflix. His business partner ensured he never lived to see its premiere."
What? Wow. Good find. This is crazy. I thought it was good. So maybe me watching it won't really matter, but it's super interesting, right? I won't get into it because we're not reviewing the show.
Right.
The fact that it's a Chinese sci-fi is super interesting because it's got kind of an almost different... It's not a very... they made the show very character-driven, but it's more high concept than anything. And
right.
also, it's one thing I find really weird. It's very critical of the Communist Party in China.
Interesting.
So I'm like, how did the book get published? And not only that, there was a Chinese version of this show that came out a few years ago, and they completely censored all of that part of the book. So that was something I was like, well, wait a second, how is this book even published in China? Like, a big part of the plot is that one of the characters like hates the CCP because of the Cultural Revolution of the 60s killing her father. So
right.
that's like a whole, and not a full spoiler, that's like the opening scene of the show. So
yeah.
So anyway, that's interesting. It's also interesting that it is what the Game of Thrones guys have been up to since the end of that show. And at least from this season, they stuck the landing. I just think it'd be funny if that just is their thing, is they make a really good show until the final season, and then they blow it every time.
Oh my god, right?
I'm sure fans of the book would hate that, but so far it's good. And so far, the YouTuber I talked about enjoyed it as well. I was curious to see what his thoughts were. But yeah, so far they're doing a good job, but it is the Game of Thrones co-creators, so you know
I have very mixed feelings about them. But so it sounds like though with this adaptation though we don't have a Last Airbender problem where Netflix readapted it and everybody either is indifferent of it or hates it. And actually I watch a lot of Nick at Night because I still watch cable TV, and Paramount, since they own Nickelodeon and everything, are really pushing the Avatar original series on their platform, which is hilarious because all they're doing is reminding everybody how much better the original one was. So that can't be good for Netflix. But that aside, so this is interesting. I came across yesterday. I'd heard about the series coming out. I'd seen it on my recommended page, like Netflix always does with their new shows. So one of the producers of the show, his name is, and there will be a lot of Chinese names in here, so I do apologize if I mispronounce them. That is not my intention. Also, this comes from an article on CNN by Nectar Gone. I will be either summarizing what he's saying or directly quoting him. So, but if you want to get like the full in-depth story, please go read his article. It's a good summary of what's going on. But anyway, so there's this guy named Lin Key. He's one of the producers. He's listed as one of the producers on the show. So I guess he's this billionaire, and I guess he got all his money from selling his video game company, like I think like a decade ago or something like that. But he loved
Did it
this.
say what his video game company was? I'm curious if it's one I've heard of.
Let's see. Flesh with Cash, a listing of his video game company of his gaming company 2014. It does not say what it is. But he loved this. I guess it's a trilogy. I think it's of books. Actually, no, it is.
Yeah, it's called the Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy. Is what the official title is. The first book's The Three Body Problem. Second book's The Dark Forest, and the third book is Death's End.
I wonder if they're going to name each season or series or whatever after the book, or if they're just going to go the Three Body Problem Part 2 or something like that.
So, according to that YouTuber I mentioned, Quinn's Ideas, I haven't read the books. I just know stuff from him talking about the books, but there's stuff from the second and third book already in this season. So I think they're just going to call it the Three Body Problem for the whole thing, because all of the other... I mean, Remembrance of Earth's Past sounds very cool, but, it doesn't roll off the tongue. So I think they're just going to keep it the Three Body Problem, and that's going to be, like, the name of the show.
Makes sense. I mean, that makes sense from a practical perspective. But so according to this article, he really wanted to kind of, like, develop this, make it a huge franchise. Like, they specifically mentioned putting it in the same league as Star Wars. That was, like, his dream. He really wanted to do this, and he'd been trying... to get this adapted for years. He finally, I think for some reason when he first started trying to adapt it, I think they said it was owned by somebody else who bought the rights from the author. And he was working on a deal with them for years. And that eventually fell apart. And then enter, this other guy who is a lawyer I believe he was hired by him, and I'm sorry if I'm messing all this up, but I'm trying to read through this, and I'm also trying to put my own perspective on it too.
It's all good.
So anyway, the main executive, Lin Key, he was poisoned and killed at the age of 39. So he had hired this previously, before his death, obviously, because I'm telling this all out of order now. He had hired this lawyer, from what I understand, whose name was Zhu Yao. And I guess from what he was able to do is he was able to somehow work with these people and get the rights to this novel, this series of novels, so that Lin Key could adapt it. And Lin Key was obviously very impressed. He was able to get this happen. So he immediately promoted this guy. He put him in charge of the section of the company that was going to be, overseeing the 3 body problem universe and all this sort of stuff. But apparently he was not very good at his job. And he was, shortly after, I think it was a few months later, he was demoted. All his projects were kind of given to other executives, and his pay was cut. He went from making $2 million, I think, to making a fourth of that or something like that. So his work was given to these other executives who were doing his stuff for him. I believe they said that Zhu Yao was going to be let go at some point. So he concocts this scheme. So he is a big fan of Breaking Bad. So
I mean, great show, but
I don't know
if I'd mix the two.
It is relevant. So he starts buying all these poisons off the dark web and sets up a lab and starts testing them on animals and stuff. I guess to try to understand which one would work the best, which one would, give the best result or whatever.
Dude, come on, you're a Breaking Bad fan. It's ricin. Ricin, it's hard to test for. That's what you go for. It's in the show, man. Come on, you don't need to test anything.
So I guess he makes a bottle of probiotic pills. That's what he tells this guy. And he gives him this bottle of probiotic pills that's laced with a bunch. It's not probiotic at all, or it's laced with a ton of stuff. I couldn't exactly tell. He then so first he's been testing this on animals. So then he not only does that, so he gives this to Lin Key to to get him to take them, and then he laces I think the beverages in the offices of the other executives who had taken over his work. And so I guess this was back in, because this is all coming out now because of the series just came in. But let me see. I forgot what year this happened.
So this is this series. This is a guy who was part of what made this Netflix series possible.
Yes. No. Yeah. They were key players in making this happen. And actually,
so crazy.
And actually, it's this series as recent as why this guy was killed, because I guess about a month. So according to this, a month before his death, he had told somebody that, not the murderer, the executive, he said that this would be, his life's legacy. He would leave it behind. He was really big into this series. This executive, he loved this series. So because he demoted this, that's why he was so passionate about this. And he demoted this guy because he wasn't doing a good job. So this guy, like I said, he hits in these probiotic pills. He becomes sick. I don't know after how long he was given them, but basically he was trying to test it so that the person would die over a period of 2 days. That's why he was texting it on cats and dogs and other animals. And then he was laced to these drinks of these other 2 guys. So he caused, I think according to this, it says 4 colleagues to fall sick. And they said that so Lin, he felt unwell. According to this, he was driving home from the Yuzu. I guess it was Yuzu Games. I guess that's his company. Yuzu Games headquarters in Shanghai when he suddenly felt unwell. And then he went to the hospital. They got him stabilized, but then he died 10 days later on Christmas Day. So this guy had worked to make these pills to kill this guy because he was upset at how he'd been treated and his role in all this sort of stuff. But the part that's wild to me is this guy was taking his cues from Breaking Bad. I'm just who watched that show and was I want to be that guy? Do you know what I mean?
You would be amazed. You'd be amazed, T. When that show came out, people's meth usage went up. Like there's some specially idiotic people where it's like, oh wow, the crystal meth is blue. Now I want to do crystal meth. I've said in the past, I think it's really dumb when you blame filmmakers or authors or whatever for people getting into, or like, their behavior. And part of the reason I feel that way is people are really stupid. You can make anything, like, if you're going to argue that, it's like you can't make any kind of story where someone does something bad or idiotic or not in their best interest, because then at that point anyone can argue that, like, oh well, why did you have a movie where people are criminals? Isn't it bad to be criminals? Well, didn't people, like,
what's interesting to me about the Breaking Bad universe is, I think the creator has said this too, is, it's kind of like the same thing as the people who just like adore Fight Club. It's like, if you like these characters, you didn't understand the movie. And I think that's kind of like the same place with, okay, I haven't watched the series, but from my understanding, this guy ends up like, he's like a megalomaniac basically, who...
What makes the show so interesting and what made it so popular, like, the premise is cool. It like, basically obviously it's not preaching that you should, manufacture drugs and become a drug kingpin. The whole point of the show is anyone has the potential to be the next, like, you should never judge a book by its cover. Like, Walter White at the beginning of that show is a very meek, mild-mannered science teacher. The last person you would expect to cook meth. And then by season 4, he is like assassinating one of the biggest drug kingpins in the city. Like, that's the point of the show, and that's what makes it so cool to people, is like, you do get kind of invested in his journey of like getting more and more powerful, but that's not like something to aspire for unless you want to be it's just kind of, there is a satisfaction to it. It's sort of like, Fight Club's a good example. It's sort of like,
well, because I've just read people, they talk about it, and it's like, he's a narcissistic character. He's abusive to the people in his life. He does this like it starts off with quote unquote honorable mentions, but honorable reasons, but basically I think it's kind of like, what the idea is that, it's not that like power changed him. It just magnified who he really was, sort of a situation.
Potentially. You can take it a lot of different ways, and I think it helps if you've seen the show, because then you can take points from earlier in the show and stuff. But at least for me, I feel like the way I took it, and it's been a few years since I've watched the show. I should give it a rewatch, because it is in my opinion, it is one of the best television shows of all time.
Right. A lot of people feel that way.
For me, it's like he got power hungry. Like, he was someone who got kind of stepped on. Like, an early point in the show is that he went into business with a friend who ended up stealing his work and getting rich off of it.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of, for me, it's, early on, I don't really think that he showed any signs of being megalomaniacal. I feel like he got a taste of being a bad guy and just really liked it. Mm-hmm. That's the way I saw it. But yeah, like, anyway, this could end up being a review of Breaking Bad. But it's like, it's another great example of like the difference between liking a story and identifying with a story is like true crime, right?
Yeah.
You can really find Ted Bundy fascinating, but once you start like wanting to be him, or being
then
one of the
you've gone off
that
the
wanting
edge.
to date him, or like, oh, I could have I could have changed him or something. Yeah, like, it's the same thing. It's the same. A lot of normal people like Fight Club. A lot of normal people like The Godfather. Those types of stories are just naturally interesting to people, because it's not something your average person really gets into, crime. You know? So in that sense, it's very, attractive to a lot of, average movie or TV show enjoyers, because it's a world they don't normally see.
Well, as somebody who's watched the show, let me see if this sounds familiar to you. He set up a lab in the suburb of Shanghai and bought more than 100 toxins on the dark web to experiment with, often testing mixed poisons on cats, dogs, and other pet animals. He then began to make lethal substance into a pill, gifting them to Lin. According to Phoenix News, a Chinese news outlet, Zhu had 160 cell phone numbers set up a trading company in Japan to acquire hazardous chemicals, including the substance used to poison his colleagues. Like, he was like setting up an empire to do this. Like, this is nuts. Like, it's literally
it is nuts.
just.
And anyone who's a fan of Breaking Bad is probably yelling at their device they're listening to this show on, because here's the big difference, and this is another reason I think the show was so popular, is like, so he is a high school chemistry teacher, right? Mm-hmm. And what is very true about crystal meth is that if you have an elementary understanding of chemistry, you can make it, and make it safely, and make it easily.
Yeah.
You know, because it's very basic chemistry. And that was what made Walter White so good at it, was that he was, he was a chemist, but he also taught. And then his sidekick in the show is kind of a stupid gangbanger type who used to be one of his students who flunked. So then there's kind of this, mentor trainee sort of thing where it's almost like he's going.
It's a power imbalance.
Again. Well, it's a power imbalance, but it's like he's back in school. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that already is kind of like, this person is an idiot, because Walter White did not have to experiment. He knew exactly what he was doing. So this person already is like fried with too much television, because it's like, if you want to succeed in this, you kind of already have to do the research. Like, again, I joked about it. For anyone listening, do not poison anyone with ricin. But in the show, that was something that happens to a character, because Walter White's like, oh no, it's very difficult to test for. It's odorless, tasteless. You can slip it into a drink. Yada. But the point is, he knew that already. It sounds like this guy did not, like, the fact he had to experiment and test on animals, like, that did not happen in Breaking Bad. The guy, like, that's part of what made Walter White so cool as a villain, but also so intimidating, is he was that smart. Like, he knew what he needed to do to get you.
And then they go on to say that there were 5 toxins found in the body of the dead of Lin Ke's dead body, including, they said that it was, let me scroll to find the name of it, because I had it here in a second. Okay, here we go. It says it included mercury and tetrodotoxin. Now, tetrodotoxin is what makes eating pufferfish so dangerous, because it has to be prepared perfectly, because if they don't, this stuff, it can be found in there, and it can, it's lethal.
Oh yeah.
So that's one of the reasons why it's so hard to cook pufferfish. You have to be trained and everything on it. So that was found in his body. And then they also said that he took this poison that he made and engineered, and he slipped it into coffee pills. He injected it into what is it called? Whiskey and water that was left in these people's offices. And I guess one of the things he injected it with was methyl mercury chloride, which, according to this article, is a toxin that can be fatal to swallowed, inhaled, or touched. So they said that, like I said, 4 people were found to be ill from this, and one of them, who did not pass away, but his name was, I think it was Zhao. I want to say his name was his name was Zhao. Zhao Zhilong. He was found to be chronically poisoned, and he had a mercury concentration in his body exceeding 10 times the safe level. So, and they said that, they don't know specifically what happened, but like I said previously, it all seems to have stemmed from him, wanting to, be a major part of this project. He said he brought it on board for this guy who was obsessed with it. And he ended up, getting demoted because he did an unimpressive job. He was even kind of cocky, it seems like, in his interview that was published in 2020. He was talking about how important he was in the Yuzu's gaming company's acquisition of the copyrights, saying, quote, we legal professionals are here to put out fires, break up the deadlock, and must have the courage to be the change maker. So I really think that, basically he was just like very resentful of, how far he was kicked down the ladder after, because he did at least secure the copyrights to these books to make everything possible. But it was, I think maybe, unless there was something else that we don't know about, the article makes it seem like they weren't happy with his performance, or he screwed up or something later. But they immediately, within months, not dropped him, but demoted him from being the leader of the section of the Yuzu gaming company's new department that was going to oversee all of the three body problems, universe. And like I said, this was I'm actually shocked more people haven't talked about this. This was buried on CNN.
Yeah, I agree, because this is the first time I've heard of this. And I'm going to say also, I'm inclined to agree with his demotion, because the guy sounds like an utter screw-up. So he poisoned multiple people. He needed, mercury or tetrodotoxin, the pufferfish stuff. Both of those are highly deadly. Why? Yeah. Why do you how did multiple people get poisoned, and how did he need to poison this guy more than once?
Well, he was trying.
Venom, a tiny amount can kill you. So
from what I read in the article is that he was trying to definitely take out Linky, but then the Zhao Zilong, I don't know if he was one of those targeted, but they said he targeted other executives who had taken over his work for him. I don't know how many there were, but I'm just
he's still a screw up, because then he only got one of them.
He only got one of them, but I want to know how this other guy lived with 10 times the amount of safe mercury. But I was just this is just a wild story that is buried. And I don't know why this isn't being talked about. Maybe, I don't know, maybe Netflix is trying to keep it chill. But he had, they did say that his name didn't appear in the credits, or he was taken off the credits or something. They didn't exactly say which one it was. So
I would hope he's not in the credits. He sounds, this is wild. You heard it here first, folks, because this is the first I'm hearing of this story. And also, I don't know how popular the three body problem is going to be, because it is I can't even entirely recommend it to you, knowing what sort of things you like and dislike, because it is really good, but knowing that things that involve existential dread tend to not play well with you. You've gotten better about post-apocalyptic stuff, but this is a very humanity is doomed kind of story.
How fun!
We do solve the problems. We do fight the alien threat, and we do survive tens of thousands of years into the future. But it's a very grim story. So it's I'd say check out the first episode, and if it seems too spooky for you, maybe don't. But it is really good. But it is probably one of the scariest alien stories.
It's an alien story.
So maybe you should watch it. I do recommend. It's interesting. Even the title of the books and show are very interesting. Are you eating something?
No, I'm not. No, I just got the notification that my headphones are low, so I'm rotating out my headphones. I'm gonna have one in my ear at a time and rotate them.
Smacking noises. I was but I would hope so. I don't know. Again, I don't know if Netflix is really even. I don't know if they would care enough. Frankly, I mean, controversy tends to get people more interested in things. So I don't even think that they would have an interest in keeping the story on the DL, because it's hey, there was a murder involved in this show. Oh, I hope no one associates the murder.
I hope no one finds out about it.
Yeah. I mean, technically that would probably generate more positive press for the show than announcing it's by the creators of Game of Thrones.
I mean,
more people...
I don't like the creators of Game of Thrones. They come across to me, these people who kind of cheated their way to the top the more you kind of read about the stuff that they did.
It's just kind of funny because they keep this is the second time they have taken a property that is not theirs And again, so far the show is really good. I just think it'd be really funny if it became like a thing they're known for, that they have a really good run of a show until the ending and then they blow it.
They can never stick the landing. That's their thing.
That YouTuber I watch had a good point though, because he also was a fan of Song of Ice and Fire, and he also really hated the ending of Game of Thrones. But he had a good point. He said, the 3-body problem is finished. Like, all 3 books are out. So they don't have to, like, improv anything. There won't be any zombie polar bears,
Yeah.
So there's a possibility that it's impossible for them to screw this up, because all of the material is right in front of them. They just need to actually adapt it, and then they should be fine.
Right. But it's like, yeah, I don't know. Anyway, with that being said, I just thought that was a fascinating story, kind of in crime intrigue. I mean, obviously, Lin Key, rest in peace. Be glad your work came to fruition. The whole world is going to see it, which is what you wanted. And I hope, posthumously you get the, the big franchise that you were hoping for. So,
absolutely. And I would agree with this moron's demotion, because he screwed up the murder too. So it's like, frankly, he sounds like,
it sounds bad, but it's like when I watch, like, in everyone's experiences who watches true crime, they're always like, when they find out, it's, you're watching a documentary about the serial killer, and like, but this time they left fingerprints, and then you're like, ha, dumbass.
A bit, but this guy just sounds like a kind of a moron.
Yeah.
Like, and you always, even really good killers get caught because there's always some evidence you leave behind. But this dude just sounds like an idiot. Like, he was inspired by Breaking Bad, so he bought, even that, I'm surprised he wasn't caught just by buying a bunch of, like, poisons on the, I'm guessing the dark web, but even so, like,
yeah, they said that he was using like dark web. Yeah, I know, like, over here, like, I don't know how it is over there, but over here, like, if you buy too much of fertilizer, like, the FDA
they've got the
comes
great
in.
firewall in China. I'd be surprised if they didn't have even more intense internet police than we do over here. The dude sounds like an idiot, to be honest. Just everything about what he was doing, how he went about it. It sounds like he might have been high on something when he came up with this idea, because it doesn't even sound like the best option of, frankly, he sounds like he probably was failing upward until they discovered how bad he was at things, and then they appropriately took action and demoted him. So
right.
Rest in power, Mr.
Key. It's
Zhao
QI. No,
QI.
QI. I think it's pronounced Key.
Key?
Yeah.
Rest in power, Mr. Key. You did a good thing. This is so far a really good show. Hopefully the bozos running things don't run it into the ground like their previous show. But it's so far it's a great show, and I hope, especially like Netflix, they tend to have like hit or miss stuff. Definitely better than Avatar. I'm always saying, if this is the first episode of the show you're listening to, I always say, like, things need to justify their existence. And that's kind of how I feel about the live action Avatar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that being said, we can now get into the main course of the episode for Found Footage Film Festival. First off, what are you drinking? I want to see if it's basically the same thing I'm drinking.
No, well, maybe it is. So one thing I think could be almost like a meme on this show is, my name is Whiskey, and I feel like I never drink whiskey, to the point where it's almost funny. Like, it's always beer, it's always wine. Last year I was trying to do cocktails. And in this movie, it turns out there's a bit of spiked whiskey.
There is.
One pivotal moment in the film. So finally, I have an excuse to drink some whiskey. I technically should have had some whiskey for Arthur, but I didn't know that Scotch was his drink of choice. So this is some Woodford Reserve Kentucky Rye bourbon.
Yes.
So tasty stuff. It's literally, if anyone saw my Oscars post from a while ago, it's that same bottle that was in the picture. So that's what I'm having. What about you?
So, same thing. I went with whiskey, but okay. Now, I probably have a very concerning search history now, because I was trying to find out if there was a cocktail called Benadryl. And if you ever look that up, there's some bizarre things people come up with. So no, there is not an official cocktail named Benadryl. However, when I was younger and I used to take liquid Benadryl, because I take like the when I have allergies, I take the pill things now. But I remember it having like a and I could be wrong, maybe I can think of literally anything else. You know how medicine has that sort of medicinal berry taste to it. I have I go to Savannah like almost every year, and they have 2 distilleries there. One of them is called Ghost Coast. Ghost Coast does flavored whiskey, so I have a peach flavored whiskey. It does not taste medicinal, but my general thinking was that if I did the peach flavored whiskey as opposed to just regular whiskey, it's kind of like I mix something. I don't know. That's where my brain went. But the point is, it's a very good whiskey. Ghost Coast peach whiskey, very delicious.
I love the name of it, Ghost Coast. That's cool, and it makes sense because it's Savannah.
It's Savannah, it's super haunted.
Yeah, well, and also peach whiskey makes sense because it's Georgia.
Yes.
Yeah, so a couple of whiskeys. Hopefully, Peach Fuzz did not spike.
Oh my god, that's perfect. No, it's peach. It's peach because it's Peach Fuzz. I didn't think about that. I did peach whiskey for its Peach Fuzz. Okay.
Oh my gosh.
Backtrack. That's why I did it. Was for Peach Fuzz, not because of Benadryl. Which sounds so much better and less disturbing. But yeah, also never Google Benadryl cocktail and think you're gonna find a drink called Benadryl, because it just won't. Anyway,
they're gonna put you on a list. They're gonna say, "Who are you trying to drug?"
Right. I'm gonna be visited by the FBI watch list. I'll be visited tomorrow. Anyway, so the movie of the hour is Creep, which came out in 2014, and it was perfect reviewing it this year because it's the 10-year anniversary of this. Didn't think about that until like today when I was like, oh yeah, 2014, 2024, 10-year anniversary. So this is like the definition of a skeleton crew film. I looked up what I couldn't find a ton. Directed by Patrick Brice, who plays Aaron. And then it's written by Patrick Brice and Mark Duplass, who are, obviously are Aaron and Joseph. There is no budget to speak of that I could find, no box office to speak of. I'm assuming Patrick Brice handheld filmed all this.
Wait, even on IMDb there was not like a box office for
it didn't get a theater release. It looks like it was premiered, from what I could tell, it was premiered at South by Southwest in 2014. And then it was purchased. It says it's produced by Blumhouse, but
yeah, no, and that was a thing. Like when I saw it, I was like, oh, here we go. That'll be something we'll get to later. But yeah, like
I think it's more like it was purchased by Blumhouse after the fact. I always get very confused about that because they make it seem like they made it, and it's like, no, somebody else did all the hard work and heavy lifting. You just bought it. So it was purchased for distribution by, as far as I can tell, by Blumhouse. And then it got its international release through Netflix. Like, it wasn't made for Netflix, but it was that's how it got its release. The Duplass brothers were involved. They have their own production company too. They were involved in this. But yeah, there's I tried looking up. I couldn't find something about a box office or a budget. But that kind of makes sense when I tell you kind of more about how it was made. So obviously we have Patrick Brice as Aaron and Mark Duplass as Joseph. So this was interesting. So I guess they originally met Patrick and Mark because according to an article that I was reading, because this is what was interesting. I tried to find stuff about this. I kept finding like people talking about what they think it means. And I believe it was an article by Bloody Disgusting by Louise HC, and he mentions that they met when I guess Bryce's wife began babysitting Mark's children when they moved out to Los Angeles. So they met, obviously they hit it off. They started, they do what all us creative types do. They start immediately coming up with ideas. They talk about what they could do together. I guess Mark loves doing these kind of like over the top characters. And they came up with the concept for Creep. It was originally called Peach Fuzz. There is, as far as I can tell, there is no script. They came up with a 5-page outline and decided to start filming. So what's interesting about that is essentially all the dialogue is really sort of ad-lib. They kind of were like, okay, we want to go in this direction. Let's see what happens. And so there are like multiple versions of every scene. And then what they would do is they would take cuts of it, show it to family and friends, and get ideas. So this is like the exact opposite of how they told us to film things in school, which I find hilarious because they were always like, never say we'll figure it out on set, because you never do. That's literally what these guys did. They figured it out on set. They would go.
I mean, I think part of that though does have to do, like, Mark Duplass is an actor. That's like, the Duplass brothers are interesting. They'd been doing this for a couple years before this movie came out. Like, Mark had a regular gig with The League, and then he would also act in other like small movies and stuff like that. But they would like produce indie films.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm guessing, I have not seen. I already forgot his name, but the guy who edited and co-wrote the movie and directed and blah blah blah. The guy who played
Patrick Bryce. It was edited by somebody else.
Patrick Bryce. I am assuming he probably met Mark in like an improv class or something, because like, I normally, the reason they teach you that in school is because you do not want to waste any time.
Right.
You're often paying for the set. You're paying for, but this was like, and this is the like what I said before we, at the very beginning of this episode, found footage films you can kind of screw around with if, depending on, where you're filming, what your budget is, who's involved. Like, it was pretty much the two of them did everything. They probably just rented that property up in, and I did look for where that was because the woods looked familiar, and I was like, ooh, I wonder if that's close to where I went to high school. It was not. It was sort of close, different forest, but
I love that. The forest looked familiar.
It did. But yeah, I'm guessing, because, it's a SoCal forest.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing they just got a rental property for a few days and just goofed around, and then, as you said, like, filmed probably like 10 different versions of each scene, and then they had it ready to like insert, and they'd probably have screenings at their house with a bunch of close friends and be like, what do you think, guys? And then based on that, so found footage, as I said, it's an interesting genre because it is the easiest kind of movie to make.
Right.
And I've talked about horror movies being a great get-rich-quick scheme, especially like slashers in the 80s, were basically kind of what this is now.
Yeah.
Because it was the same deal, like we years ago reviewed Friday the 13th, and that was pretty much a bunch of teenagers goofing off in the woods. And
by the way,
who knows? There might have been a couple different like death scenes, and then it's like, that's not that good. Let's do it this way.
Let's do it again.
Exactly.
Be more just quick side note, Friday the 13th is amazing on like an old black and white TV, and it's kind of scarier that way. I'm just gonna say it because you don't get the 70s like coloring, which is part of its charm though, but you don't get like the 70s like, fluorescent blood, so it looks more disturbing actually. But so they said that they originally developed this, they called it Peach Fuzz, and they were they, from what I could read on these different things, it was originally developed more as a black comedy, and through working with friends and everything, it became more psychological horror, and I actually think that works really, really well. I don't know how, especially with now, I don't know how they would have changed the scenes and the ending and everything with a black comedy. This works really well as a psychological horror film, and I do think that was a smart choice, and their friends who told them that
I think it still kind of is a black comedy. One thing I noticed, and I don't know if you got this, I think they were making fun of jump scares.
Oh my god, right?
Because they happened so frequently, and they were so stupid every time that by the end of the movie, you're just like numb to it, and you know when they're coming. And every time it was like nothing actually happened whenever there was a jump scare, and I felt like that was a running joke. Because this was kind of around the time, the indie horror scene was starting to get big, but there was still like those big budget, like I think the Insidious movies were still going on and stuff. So I feel like that was like a joke that they were doing. Like, oh, let's just constantly have loud, annoying jump scares throughout the movie.
And I love how they all come from Joseph.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
and same thing too, like this is an interesting movie because I do still kind of feel like it's a bit of a black comedy. It feels like a really good improv movie. Like, yeah. I'm sure if you're like sensitive to scary movies, maybe it would be kind of a hard watch, but I feel like this is like really good character work. and you do sort of get that idea that they were like, when what you said about them like making different versions of the scenes, I get that, because it definitely feels kind of like they were improvising the whole movie, and not in a bad way. But it also sort of makes Mark Duplass's character one of the more interesting psychos in horror movies.
Right.
Because he's like weirdly charismatic. He's almost kind of likable, which is weird to say. But I don't know. I think part of it is just how crazy he is, where he never goes full rage psychopath. You know, like he's always kind of like easygoing and charming, even when he's being crazy.
Right. Actually, the point that you just hit on that, I read an article that actually I think touches on exactly what you're talking about, and I believe it was called like the art Creep, and I wish I could find it, and the art of like the subtle psychopath. Creep and the horror of the subtle psychopath. That was an article by Brendan Morrow for Bloody Disgusting. So and like you said, I think that's what really makes his character work. I mean, I have some stuff to comment on about his character, but I really think that's what it is. Like he never really comes out like axe swinging, you know, for a majority of the movie.
Yeah, and I think that's also very relatable to a lot of people, because I also think that type of person you come across in reality a lot more, but they're also scarier, you know? You never see like a real Patrick Bateman or Patrick Bates, which is
it's Norman Bates.
Sorry, Patrick Bateman, Norman Bates. You don't really see like Leatherface or anything. Any real like sociopathic behavior you come across in real life, it's like the person doesn't really acknowledge or understand what they're doing is weird or creepy. You know, they almost look at you like you're the one being weird, and there's something like unsettling about that, and that doesn't really ever happen in horror movies, I guess, because they're really trying to get that reaction out of the audience. They need the loud, scary, like, you know, he's coming at you with a knife. But everything that Mark Duplass's character would do in this movie would just be so, like, what do you mean? What do you mean about that? You know, like, and also just the fact that nothing he said, even by the end of this movie, you don't know what was a lie and what wasn't, really. You know, there's the whole famous Peach Fuzz story he tells,
right,
where, you know, the camera, is the camera on? No, I turned it off. And then you hear that story about him attacking his own wife. And it's like, you know, when you're watching the movie the first time, I kind of, at least for me, I sort of thought this might be the one time he's telling the truth.
Right.
No, you don't. Well, maybe it was. Like, nothing he says in the movie can really be verified at any point, like, especially by the ending of the movie. It's like, you don't know anything about him other than the fact that he is mentally unwell and his family is apparently aware of it.
Yes.
So, like, that to me is what is unique about him, and what's scary about him is he does not come off. I actually hate the title of this movie, but I do think I get why they changed it, and I feel like it's a great description for his character, because he's creepy, but he's not scary.
And I wish because I read like 19 different articles of like all about people talking about this movie, and one of them he said, and I wish I could find out what it was so I could give them the proper credits. But they said that obviously they changed it. They said, and this person said that they liked that because by doing it, not only is it about, you know, obviously a creep, but it's also about how he sort of creeps up on you and on Aaron. So
he loves doing that jump scare, man. Always.
Yeah, bleh. There's that. Gotcha. Well, it's interesting is because, you know, as we've become more socially conscious, and, you know, I don't want to say we've become more aware of setting boundaries in life, which I don't really think was necessarily part of the discussion a decade ago. I think we were getting there, but we weren't there yet. So what's interesting about this is nowadays we talk about, you know, never feel, especially with women, we try to be like, if you feel uncomfortable, don't be polite, leave. And that wasn't really something that was talked about. I think it was starting to talk about, not really talked about, but that's really kind of the crux of this whole movie is Aaron never it's like, because everything that for the most part that happens can be explained by his character, like us as the viewers of a horror movie, it's much easier for us to see, oh my God, but for the character, it's much more like, okay, he's just quirky, he's just weird, he has an odd sense of humor, he's socially awkward. Like you could kind of tell, like, the character of Aaron was sort of telling himself that a lot through this movie. And somebody, I should have made notes of this, I feel so bad. I will probably just read the names of all the articles and the people at the end of it just to make sure they got credit, because these are not my original thoughts that I'm talking about right now.
You're good.
So they talked about how and even in some ways the movie kind of makes the ending feel like Aaron sort of deserves it. It's like, really, you went back after all that? But it's kind of like, they also describe how Aaron's kind of all of us, especially for the time. We want to be nice, and I'm not talking about obviously like nihilistic people, but we generally try to see or find the good in people. And we wanted to believe that he was, especially at the end, we wanted to believe that he was just lonely. Because if you think about it, his gifts, for the most part, except for that garbage bag video, for the most part, could be easily seen as somebody reaching out for, and doing it the wrong way, obviously, for companionship, for comfort. You can see all that. So it's conceivable to see, okay, this is just a lonely guy. We know that as the omniscient viewers, that's not the case, but we can see how Aaron got there. But like somebody said, the movie kind of makes the point of Aaron kind of deserves that for being stupid. Which I kind of feel bad for that person to say that. I don't think he deserved it, but I kind of see what they're trying to say,
And I kind of get that, because I was thinking the same thing throughout the movie, and I think one of the most annoying criticisms by, like, horror viewers, like, usually you don't get this from horror fans because they understand it's, like, part of the genre, but, like, the whole, don't go in there, don't go, like, yeah, I mean, if they didn't, though, the movie wouldn't happen.
Right.
I think better horror movies come up with better motivation for people to go into the spooky house, but... and that too. This movie does a decent enough job kind of setting up the fact that this guy is short enough on money that he is willing to do something really dumb and risky. Because even before, like when he's driving up, he's like, oh, maybe it's like a hot single or something. Like, he's not a very smart guy to begin with.
He's overly naive.
He's overly naive. He's expecting an unrealistically good thing to happen. And also, it's like... It is a little bit amazing to me that he had no idea what kind of project he was going to do until he meets the guy, and it's like, oh, I have cancer, and I want you to follow me around for my... Like, you would think, especially in, like, a Craigslist ad, that the person would at least have, like, it's a videography project. Like, what? Is that all they said?
Maybe not all the details, but, like, something, hey, I'm doing a video diary for today. I need, something at least like that, obviously not spill the whole story, but like you said, not just, I need a videographer for like 8 hours. I need someone to film me throughout my day. I need someone to film an event. I need, something just more concrete like that.
The other thing I think, like with this movie especially, like, so another thing that kind of makes found footage films a little easier to make is that if you overthink things, it can come off as too formulaic.
Yeah.
People are dumb in real life. Like,
yes.
If you ever watch any home videos, police body cams, like any real found footage, like, people are really dumb in real life. Like, we do, like, as much as we love to critique people in movies, we're not much better.
Right.
We go into the spooky house. So the fact that they kind of... The improv, I think, was a strength in this particular project because it made it feel more real, because there wasn't a lot of excessive planning on what was going to happen in the movie. It felt very organic. Like, every interaction they had did not feel scripted whatsoever because it wasn't, but also that kind of added to the fact that it is a found footage film.
Yes. So I'm actually, because there was a couple things I want to talk about with this. I actually just I texted you a picture that I will bring up in a second, and I will talk about how it relates to everything. But I really wanted to, kind of just talk about what these movie strengths are like, and keep doing what we're doing right now. Like you said, people are dumb in real life. And that's kind of what makes this movie great, is because several people's articles have pointed out that, like you said, don't go in there. It's like we all think ourselves, I wouldn't do that, or I wouldn't do this. But because the way the movie structures all of its dialogue is like, it sets up something creepy and then it explains it away, you kind of just go along with it. You're not really like after repeated viewings, you're kind of like, dude, oh my God, stop. But and then the other thing I want to talk about was the guerrilla filmmaking that we talked about, where you said you looked up The Cabin. That this is really one of the ways like that inexpensive filmmaking will work for the story, because as we find out, it's on his house. He probably just broke into this cabin. For all we know, those people could be dead in the basement somewhere, or it's just off season. We don't know. But the fact that nothing in there looks personal or tied to him makes total sense. And especially like when he has like medicine, like when there's Benadryl in there, if he's trying to he's not going to leave anything for anybody else. Now, I wanted to talk about the character of Peach Fuzz and the character and the character of Joseph, because because I also try to understand Joseph's motivations, which I think we're not supposed to, but
yeah.
I try to understand this, because I kind of wonder, my mind wonders, what would have happened if Aaron had stayed there? Would he have died, or would he have just been assaulted? And the reason why I say this is because the character of Peach Fuzz, I get the impression he really sexualizes this character. Mark Duplass, Joseph, does.
Absolutely, especially with the story of his wife.
He tells that story, but then when he blocks him at the door, he's like gyrating and stuff. Like, it's very uncomfortable. And then if you think about it, it's almost like grooming, because when he first meets him, the first thing he does is immediately gets naked.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah.
So it's like, it's kind of like, so I kind of wonder, is he like a serial rapist, and like the ones who don't submit or let him do whatever are the ones who die? Like, I know maybe I'm reading way too much into this, but I really want to understand, somebody pointed out that he's only Peach Fuzz when he does the most despicable of things. Like, he talked about the assault of his wife while he was dressed in this costume, and when he kills him at the end, axe to the head, he's dressed as Peach Fuzz again. Like, he isn't at first, but then he puts it on before he actually axes him. But the fact that he blocks the door as Peach Fuzz, I'm just like, was he gonna just like, was the original plan to just like rape Aaron? Or I'm just trying to, you know what I'm trying to say is, I'm trying to, put like, I guess, a method to it, and maybe you can't, but I'm just, he's a very interesting character, and I want to understand, everything.
I know what you mean. And the fact I did not know that they were originally going to call the film Peach Fuzz. I wish they had. Funny thing, I knew which movie you were talking about when we went to see this, but one thing that is a problem with this movie is the title, because it is more marketable if you just call it Creep. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if Blumhouse was aware, or Jason Blum was aware of this. There's like 5 movies called Creep.
Yeah.
Like, at the time this came out, yeah, it was very easy to, Creep? Yeah, the thing that's on Netflix from Blumhouse Productions. But, like, when I was searching for this, and again, I knew which film you were talking about, like, when I was searching for this, like, 5 different different movies called Creep came out, and, obviously, because I knew what I was looking for, I selected the 2014 one. But the fact that they called the film Peach Fuzz before it was bought or whatever happened, I think is an indicator that is a more significant aspect of the movie than maybe we're led to let on.
Right, and that's what I'm saying.
So in 2017, they did do a sequel to this. Did you see that one?
I have not seen Creep 2, and the reason why is because I really, really liked this movie. And if it was bad, or if it explained a part of the story that I didn't like, I will watch it, but it's like I didn't want to like ruin the experience of this, because I went through a phase, and this was shortly after I first saw Silence of the Lambs, and this is when you and I right after you and I shortly became friends. I remember you were so mad that guy ruined Silence of the Lambs for me, because he ruined like the major, you know, bait and switch for you in that movie. But I went on this thing where I was like, let me try to talk. So I watched a whole bunch of these horror movies. Like I watched, like, you know, obviously, you know, the mainstream ones like The Omen and Children of the Corn, which by the way were both awful. I'm so sorry, Stephen King. I don't know what.
Omen?
The original one, yeah. Well,
really?
Actually, it wasn't bad. It was just very 70s.
Yeah.
So
I mean, it's anyway. That could be a whole other. Partly because I mean, The Exorcist is the better movie, but considering you're an Exorcist fan, I think that's why I'm surprised you didn't like The Omen. But
So I watched this, you know, I eventually met my end, and I'm like, I'm not going to watch horror movies anymore. I think I told you about this. I started watching Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, and I was like, this is too disturbing. I need to go touch grass.
Yeah, that one's too much. And that's a great movie, by the way, but yeah, that one will, you need to go outside after seeing that movie.
Like I said, this was such a special movie for me, because I literally knew nothing about the movie. It had, at the time, it was only like a year or two old, and I just kind of went into it blind, and I loved it. And I just found it fascinating. I found it interesting. I found it chilling. So like I said, I didn't want to watch the sequel because I didn't want to like ruin that movie. I will watch the sequel now, because I have read that it got because, you know, this movie when it came out got rave reviews. I even managed to find the the original Variety review of it from 2014, and got rave reviews, 90% of Rotten Tomato. A bunch of people loved it. Ironically, this one horror blog or magazine, I don't know what it's called, Shock Till You Drop, they panned the film, but that's besides the point, because everybody else,
they're in the minority. I actually had not seen this until we reviewed it, but I did remember part of the reason I knew which film you were talking about is because this was sort of a big deal when it came out. Like,
yes,
you're jogging my memory with it not having box office stuff, but I believe this is like a Netflix film, which is why I was
they bought
able to watch it. But this was before that was a normal thing.
I
remember this was a hit when it came out. Like, people were enjoying it. Young kids were like really into this. And I think this was kind of a proving ground for Netflix films, because this was not like produced by them, but they, you know, distributed it for Blumhouse, and it did really well through streaming. So this was sort of them seeing, we could actually make our own movies,
right?
You know? And people are actually enjoying them. So, like, this was sort of a big film the year it came out. I happened not to see it, which is funny because I didn't even know it was released by Netflix. I did at the time. It's one of those, it came out, I remembered it was a big deal, forgot about it, and now we're here.
Like the Babadook.
Yeah, although that one I saw when it came out, and that's a great one. Anyway. But yeah, like, this is, it makes sense that you, I did not know that about you. I did not know you went on a horror binge after watching Silence of the Lambs, although that makes sense. But it's...
I went through a whole period, like, for the longest time, I was completely unaffected by horror films, and then I saw Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, and I was like, oh my god, I got my conscience back, or whatever it was, and I was like, stop. But yeah, so that's the reason why I had seen the sequel. Speaking of that, they do have plans for a third one. According to an interview that Patrick Brice gave back in 2019, let me pull it up because I want to quote him exactly. He talked about, oh my god, and let me find it, because like I said, I have 19 tabs open about this movie. Okay, I can't find the article, but basically he said that they'd finally come up in 2019. Patrick Brice said they'd finally come up with a story they liked, and they were trying to find time in their schedules with him and Mark Duplass to come back and do something, because I think he's in directing, and obviously it cannot be Aaron's character again unless we're doing ghostly stuff this time. But then obviously 2019, and then that goes into, you know, in COVID, and so I'm pretty sure this has just been on an indefinite hiatus because of all that. But I really am eager to see this, because it's very rare that usually a sequel also gets very good reviews. Usually It's like, you know, the first one's good and the kind one's kind of, it's okay. But what I've been reading is people said they really liked the sequel also.
Yeah, I did. Honestly, like, considering the Duplass brothers have sort of, they're a bit hit or miss. With a lot of the films they produced, but this one I'd be surprised. I haven't seen the second one either, but I'd be surprised if it was bad, because it seemed like Mark and Patrick had a very fun time doing this, and they seemed to have good chemistry, and they seem to have kind of like they agree with what they want out of this, you know, story, this character. And again, I do kind of agree with whatever article said that Peach Fuzz is an underrated horror character, villain, whatever. Because, as I said, like, technically, if you want to sort of categorize this, you could call it a slasher, sort of, except that it's just one victim. Like, the ending was what was really cool, and what really opened this up for sequels was when you found all of the VHS tapes.
Yes.
And you found that this was just the most recent guy. And that also was like, it kind of showed why this is a found footage film. Like, this is Joseph's stash. Like, this is you're watching it as the audience, but, you know, technically it would just be something that he would watch for his own enjoyment. And that was really cool. And that's like, oh, wow. So they could make infinite sequels of this where it's just different. In fact, I haven't seen Creep 2, but you know what would be really cool is if Creep 2 took place before.
Oh, yeah. That'd
be really cool. And then you could even have a cameo of him. Like, maybe they're in the LA area, and Aaron
walks by or
like
something
in the background, like he hasn't met him yet.
He hasn't met him yet, but he's filming for like somebody else or something like that.
Or just like maybe like he's just walking around in the city or wherever Aaron lives and is just filming, and you just see him like sitting. Maybe they're in like Silver Lake or something, and he's just like eating at some like bougie hipster cafe or something.
Right, because Aaron is like, he just looks like a total hipster.
He looks like someone who would live in like Silver Lake Echo Park. But maybe, yeah, like, didn't he mention like, no, I guess he never really talked about his personal life besides the peeing his pants thing.
Yeah.
But anyway, like, but that would be cool. This they set it up in a great way where there could be sequels. With it being Blumhouse, no brainer that there was going to be sequels, because of course they are.
Well, and speaking, because I know you talked about how you wish they called it Peach Fuzz. So in some of the articles I read, they said, some people said this, some didn't say this, the reason that they called it Creep was because they didn't want you to spend too much time thinking about what Peach Fuzz was or who Peach Fuzz was or something like that. Which is weird to me. But now that I think about it, hold on, I'm thinking back to the plot of this movie. Going back to what I said previously, because now I'm just like, the gears are turning, you know, I'm just thinking about this. When he tells the story about his quote unquote wife, I wonder if he's kind of, you know, telling him what's going to happen to him, you know, if he cooperates almost. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I kind of wonder if that's just a warning. And I also wonder if his sister says, you need to get away from him, you have problems. I wonder if he did that to her. And so he's framing it as his wife. But
that's a good question.
I'm thinking about stuff because if you notice, when you look at the tapes at the end, it's mostly men, but there are some women's names in there. So it's not just he has, you know, like a specific type, unless his type is like videographers. I don't know.
You know, it is entirely possible they got into this in Creep 2, and you could be right on the money and you wouldn't even know.
I would love that if I'm like, oh my God, I read all the signs right. One other thing about this that was interesting was people talked about how this is, and I have never heard of this before. Let me see if you've heard of this. They said this is an offshoot of a type of filmmaking that's called mumblecore.
Yeah, that's Mark Duplass. Oh God, yeah.
This is called mumble gore because it's that type of movie in a horror context.
Oh God, this is such a time capsule. I remember everyone talking about that when this came out, actually. Because mumblecore, the Duplass brothers are one of the, like, if you're talking about like filmmakers who are like the mumblecore people, like they're one of them. So, yeah, no, I kind of get that. I don't know if I would call this mumblecore. It definitely could be. It's one of those subgenres that's kind of hard to even really, you know.
Like, from what I could read,
it's kind of like back in the day. I remember if I talked about indie movies, I had one friend who like thought of indie movies as like a genre and not like independent films. You know, I think I talked about this back in our review of like 500 Days of Summer,
right?
Where it's like, oh, indie movies. There's like The Pregnant Girlfriend, and then there's like indie rock bands, and you know, like things almost like tropes in the movie would like dignify it as a genre, and it's like I'm not a big fan of that because that's not a real thing. You know, there's certain tropes that end up in movies. Like we also talked about the Manic Pixie Dream Girl.
Yeah.
But like mumblecore is hard to really. The reason it is called that is it's like a type of indie movie that's like not about anything, and frankly, it's kind of a genre I'm glad is dead because it was just movies about nothing with like really pretentious people just talking at each other, but like with bad audio, so you can't understand what they're saying. So, like, and I'm being mean, but, like, that's kind of why it's called what it's called, and that's also why you don't really see anyone lamenting that it's gone.
I had never heard of this. Like, I found the Wikipedia page said that it's, they call it's characterized by naturalistic acting and sometimes improvised dialogue, low budgets, and an emphasis on the dialogue over plot, and a focus on the personal relationships of young adults.
Yes, and that is being very charitable because, again, like just
tell
like
us how you really feel, Whiskey.
So just like anything, you know, again, I started this whole found footage film festival because I thought you didn't really like this type of subgenre. In the same vein, you know, not all mumblecore is crap, and what they just described, I think that's great. That's a perfect, you know, that is what it's about. And there's like other movies that are considered mumblecore that I don't think are bad movies. Like one I've been wanting to talk about with you on the show and might end up coming up soon is the Before Sunrise movies. Those are considered mumblecore, also by a very good director who has a, you know, it's oh goodness, what's his name, Richard Linklater. So, and frankly, that too, Slacker was kind of considered mumblecore. I don't know if I'd completely consider it that. But yeah, I
mean,
feel,
I'm just...
So, like, based on some of the things you listed, this could be mumblegore, because it is naturalistic dialogue, it is improvised, it is a very low budget. I think the only thing it doesn't really, you know, hit is the whole, like, coming-of-age aspect of it.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I mean, technically, yeah, I could see this being considered mumblecore.
I was just like, I just discovered a whole new genre, and I don't know if I like it from what I'm reading about it. Because, like, because to me, it sounds weird because I'd almost kind of, they say, you know, it's about dialogue over plot. Well, to me, then, the dialogue is the plot, so it's not dialogue over plot. Like, you know, do you know what I mean? It's like I put Creep in the same category as like The Exorcist, because The Exorcist is more about trying to figure out what's going on with her as opposed to, you know, us running around and being chased by demons and all this other stuff. It's like, it's a movie. Like, I went and saw this at midnight at Coolidge Corner in Boston, and people, and like young people, it sounds bad, I sound so old, younger people were like falling asleep in the theater and like snoring. Because like it's like almost like quote unquote nothing was happening, but to me I kind of put the same thing. It's like it's like such a slow burn like that, even though it's only like 120 minutes, or so that's why I'm just.
Are you saying people were falling asleep during The Exorcist?
Yes, they were. There was this guy like that was like a row in front of me who was snoring.
Wow, that's embarrassing. That's embarrassing. Yeah, no, that's yeah, don't take that as an indicator of anything other than that person was probably blackout drunk or had a double-digit IQ. But no, like, as I sound mean when I'm talking about mumblecore. Again, every genre, there's good and bad versions. And again, speaking of the genre we're talking about this month, you know, there's a lot of awful found footage films to the point where a lot of people probably just associate it with crap. Same thing with mumblecore. I don't think, again, like Slacker, based on the definition that you gave, I do think Slacker technically would be under the umbrella of mumblecore. But that also I would consider a pretty good movie, even though there's not much of a plot. It's just a bunch of like,
oh my god,
20-somethings talking, but
so,
it's just kind of amusing.
They specifically list that there is some people refer to this genre as Slackavettes, a portmanteau derived from the 1990s film Slacker and the director John Cassavetes. So you were right on the money.
As I said, I remember mumblecore in the like late 2000s, early 2010s. It was a big thing, and I hated it. Because again, like, frankly, it's kind of, I love that got brought into this. I never thought of that genre, but and the more I'm thinking of it, the more I'm like, nah, you know what? Creep is mumblegore. I like that. We should have more mumblegore movies in the horror community. Let's make some more of these.
And I guess when I look at this, I guess I can kind of see how it's mumblegore. I guess, like, for me, though, from the beginning, it had a very defined plot. I would say, though, it goes
kind of meanders. Like, that's the thing where it has a setup, and then it's just kind of them talking.
Maybe
like, that's where it definitely is mumblecore adjacent.
Yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe that's what. Yeah, it's a lot of them. Especially like that scene at the diner. That's just talking. I mean, like, for the most part, it's meant to make us like the conversations are supposed to just make us uncomfortable, I guess, which is why I guess to me it's not just like aim. But I see what you mean though about it meandering sort of towards the beginning, because like it's not really until we sort of get the hint something's up with this guy that, you know, we really kind of, if it hadn't been for the marketing and the name, you kind of would have been, is this horror?
What I think is, like, especially if you're talking about like dialogue dependent movies like mumblecore, I think the thing that distinguishes good and bad dialogue is there a point to it? You know, like, are we learning anything about the characters? Are we furthering anything? What is interesting about this film in particular is that we think we're learning a lot about Joseph, and then, as I said, it turns out by the end of the film you don't really know if anything he said was real. But it takes like 70% of the movie to get to that point. So yeah. For most of the movie, you feel like you're kind of understanding why he's being a weirdo. Like, at first it's, oh, he's dying. Like, so he's not taking anything very seriously. He's like okay with being nude in front of a stranger. He's, talking to the camera as if it's his unborn son, and then, and not only that, we learn a little bit about Aaron as well. There's the great scene in the diner where he asks him what the most embarrassing moment of his life was.
Yeah.
So, like, no matter, and that's the other thing too. A lot of young kids liked this when it came out. I remember, like, the Zoomers when they were in like middle school were raving about this movie. Like, that was kind of the demographic that was really into this when it came out. Like, horror fans liked it, casual, movie people really liked it on Netflix. But I remember a lot of like kids were talking about this on like social media and stuff. So the fact that little kids were like not bored with this and falling asleep as if it were The Exorcist at Coolidge Corner, I think that's a good sign for the dialogue. Because
right.
Any movie where it's just a lot of talking, kids are going to tune out. But I think this film did a good job of like keeping you interested in what they were talking about.
Right.
Which is also, I talk about the jump scares being kind of a joke, but frankly, this film did not like a lot of the things that irritate me in big budget horror. I've talked about jump scares and excessive gore are like my two pet peeves with horror movies.
Yeah.
Not in this movie. It relies, like, when it actually is being tense, it's very organic, and it doesn't even really happen until the end of the film. It's, once he is drugged with the whiskey, that's when we finally are like sure there is something wrong going on. A little bit before we're, anyone who's seen a movie before has suspicions because his keys are missing, right?
Yeah.
But, once he's drugged, that's when it's like, okay, the other shoe is dropped. We know what's going on. And especially when he picks up the phone when his sister calls or whoever the woman is on the line. And that's when it gets very tense. but it's, again, it doesn't feel forced. And one thing I was not expecting, that I was very pleasantly surprised, I thought the film was only going to take place at the house, cabin, whatever you want to call it.
Yes.
So once he left and you see the creepy videotape, and then he turns the camera around, he's like, so this was sent to me in the mail. This guy knows where I live.
That's uncomfortable.
That was when the film got really good.
Yeah.
Because that's way scarier. Like, if you get out of that situation and the guy knows where you live without you telling him, that's where it gets really scary. Because anyone, that it's a very typical horror setup is being out in the middle of nowhere, no one can help you, and that's where you die, but for this type of film, that would be kind of boring.
Yeah.
So the fact that they extended it a little bit, so like 20 minutes of the film takes place at Aaron's apartment, loved that. Made it a lot scarier, made you really wonder how the guy found where he lived. And also I liked there was a little bit, speaking of what you were talking about women being polite and the maybe sexual kind of angle of this.
Yes.
There is definitely a very, very big point they're trying to make about stalking
Yes.
in this. Because it's right. It's true. Like the whole bit where he calls the police and they're like, well, what do you want us to do about it?
Right.
It's true, because he hasn't done anything yet. Like,
he hasn't done anything yet, and Joseph has put himself in such a position where he really doesn't know anything about him. He never took him to his own place. He never gave him his real name. He didn't even Venmo him. He paid him cash.
Yeah. So even though it's not like, it's not obviously that type of situation where it's like an ex-lover or something, I thought it was interesting and probably kind of a point they were trying to make in the movie. Maybe not as overtly as, just trying to make like an entertaining movie, but a lot of what he was dealing with that police call was what a woman would be dealing with a stalker.
Yes. And
that was kind of, it was amusing, but it was also like, wow, not much has changed.
Yeah.
Since this came out, because it's still, and it frankly, it is kind of difficult, because it's like, well, what do you want us to do? Like, where does he live? What's his name? Oh, you don't know? Oh, you don't know? Oh, you don't know? I guess one question I had going into this, like, so, as I said, I sort of conceived of this because I had the impression that you don't like found footage films very much. Two-part question: what about this film do you think is better than most found footage films? And I guess, like, what other found footage films have you seen? I think you mentioned you've seen like the Blair Witch.
Yes.
But like, have you seen a bunch? Or
so
like...
the two that come to mind right now, I know I've seen probably like 3 or 4. The two that come to mind is Blair Witch. And I don't know if that's necessarily Blair Witch's fault. I just remember when I was a kid, it was hyped up. It was this big deal. Oh my God, it was so scary. The kids who had seen it, oh my God, it's terrifying. And I saw it and I was kind of like, this is it. Yeah. But that's not the film's fault. The thing that bugs me about it is, and I remember I saw years ago when it was on HBO, and it pushed some of my other buttons, then you know what they are. I saw Cloverfield.
Oh yeah.
And it was just like, it nauseated me, the amount of that. Then Paranormal Activity is another one I saw. Paranormal Activity I didn't like because it wasn't good horror, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Because like I said, the horror movies I like The Exorcist and everything, it takes the subject matter seriously, and I guess you could say like they take it does, but it doesn't, because it's so over the top that it's not believable. There's so many ridiculous jump scares. And like I said, that's one of the reasons why I like The Exorcist, because when I watch movies like The Conjuring or The Exorcist, it's because the subject matter is what I'm interested in. Does that make sense? I don't watch horror movies for the scares.
I do. I know, like, with paranormal stuff, you take that more seriously than the average moviegoer. So the thing that irritated me the most about Cloverfield is I hated that they established that the guy holding the camera was kind of an idiot who had never. They straight up make it so that he's like, how does this work? And then for the rest of the movie, he's Michael Bay.
Right.
Like, he's just, like, how?
Do you know what that reminded me of?
Doesn't even know how the camera works, getting all of these amazing shots. Like,
do you know what that
drove me crazy.
That reminded me of, and I don't know if you ever read these in elementary school, there was that whole book series called Dear America.
I didn't.
So,
no.
So it was basically all these just girls from different historic backgrounds, you know, writing about their time period. Anyway, they would always start all of them with the same way because they had to figure out some reason why they have a diary, right? This book was given to me by my governess because she, you know what I'm trying to say? It's like it was trying too hard to make it seem like, you know, this is just a, you know, not real thing, and then immediately goes into like great writing. I mean,
it's just so funny to me that, like, no, and that makes sense with what I was talking about. It's just, it's funny that that's, like, my main problem with the first Cloverfield. Like, I actually like the idea of a kaiju film being found footage. It's just, like, I mean, why not have that character, like, you hired a videographer for the party or something?
Right.
Like, because then it would make sense that the guy would know what he's doing, and, like, also that he would be, like, wanting to get shots. Like, again, it's so weird in that movie that they establish the guy holding the camera doesn't care. He's never used the camera before. And then for the whole rest of the movie, he is so passionate about, no, I need to get this on film. And he's also, like, doing stuff that a trained cinematographer wouldn't be able to do under the circumstances. Anyway, but with Paranormal Activity, you take paranormal stuff very seriously. The stuff that I was really impressed with, one, I don't know if you know this, but when that film came out, a lot of people thought it was real.
Yeah, I
it was
remember
like the
that.
Blair Witch Project
Yeah.
all over. If that happens, you really got to hand it to the filmmakers. Like, and I wasn't really, like, on that hype train, but I was impressed with the special effects because I was like, whoa, how did they do? Because I knew it wasn't real, and I'm like, how did they do that? No wonder they're tricking a bunch of people. Also, I really liked that shot they had, you know, the bedroom shot.
Yes.
Because it was fun watching that in a theater and having people react every time it went to that shot, because people would be like, oh my god, no, because they knew what was coming.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, like, there were, like, filmmaking techniques in that film that I wasn't a mega fan of it. I think I was like 17, 18, like I was about to graduate high school, so I was kind of over that whole thing. But I couldn't hate the movie because I was genuinely impressed with a lot of stuff that it did very cleverly.
Well, then the other
but
thing...
no, that makes sense with those things that you listed.
And then the other thing I hated about it, and this again, like, maybe this is not the meme's fault, but then after the success of, like, Cloverfield and Paranormal Activity, there was a whole huge slew of just garbage found footage films that came out. Like, I think they tried to revive it a few years ago with that. I remember seeing the trailer for it. It was awful. It was called, like, Unfriended or something. It's like they're on a Skype call.
Oh, God. There's so... Dude, you know what's really funny? Like, you would think that when Blair Witch came out, you would think there would have been a lot of copycats at that time. Not really. Honestly, it took like a decade for found footage copycats to start being a thing. And I think part of it was just how... ubiquitous, like, film equipment, like, at that point, like, the iPhone had come out, like, anyone could be a filmmaker if they knew a little bit of something. So it's just kind of interesting, right? Like, because, you know, the late 90s is when that genre really took off, but you didn't see a ton of garbage until, like, a decade later.
Yeah.
And not, like, as much as I just ranted about Cloverfield, like, I can't say that that's a bad movie either.
And I forget, but the one with John Goodman, that wasn't found footage, right?
That was the one with John Goodman was not found footage, and that one was the better film in my opinion. But yeah, anyway, I just was curious. But it sounds like I can't exactly blame you. I was just a little curious because I could have sworn you said you didn't think found footage films tended to be good. I can't blame you because there is a lot of bad ones that come out.
And it's like when the
ones.
preponderance of the ones that I'm seeing coming out are not that good, you know, it's kind of like people always say, you always remember when someone's something bad about you as opposed to someone saying something good about you. You tend to remember the bad stuff, and that's like all I remember about that. And I just feel so bad that I missed the train for Blair Witch. Like
I think and I've talked about this. I don't think we're ever going to review that film on this. Like, we used to talk about, like, more talked about films. I feel like that's like, what could we say that has not been said about
what
that
can
film?
we add to the conversation? Nothing really.
The reason, so if I am showing that film to someone who is uninformed, I will tell them that it's real. And the reason I do that is because that is why the film was so hyped up. People genuinely, it's the same as Paranormal Activity with people thinking that it was like real footage. That's why it was so hyped up, is people thought that it was, and part of the reason they thought that is because up until a long time after the film came out, they claimed it was real.
Yeah.
And that is why that movie is scary. Like, you have to put yourself in the mindset of, like, no, these 3 people really disappeared, and this is the last footage we've seen of them.
Yeah.
Like, you have to keep that in your brain when you're watching the movie, and then it gets a lot scarier.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with that movie, is if you just take it as this was a film made by a couple of college kids that got incredibly popular and was played in major theaters, you're not going to be afraid of it. Like, you really have to have that mindset that everyone had in like 99, 97, whenever it came out, that it's real, because that's what made it scary.
Yeah.
And that is the problem with a lot of, especially, like, I feel like, because you don't see a lot of found footage movies now, and I think that's because everyone is ruined by the internet. No one believes anything is real anymore.
Right. Well, that's why they tried to.
You can't trick anybody anymore.
They tried to adapt it for the internet age, like I said, like by doing that unfriended thing, by having it take place on Skype, but it was just bad. So
I think for found footage these days, you can't do horror anymore because that relies on like shock value.
Yeah.
And it won't work. Like, there are other genres that have done found footage. You've got Chronicle, which was initially going to be an Akira live action film. So that was a whole thing. And then there was also Project X, which was essentially, like a high school
party movie
comedy movie.
Yeah.
I think if you do something like that, you can do found footage. But I feel like horror has just been ruined. Like, I don't think anyone, unless you are extremely talented, I just don't think it would work anymore. It's been done to death to the point where, like you said, Unfriended was like the last gasp of that genre being relevant in horror, where it's like, oh, it's a video call. Like, okay.
Well, they always say there's a movie that kills a genre, and it's usually dead for a while, and then something happens and it's revived. Like, oh my God, something just came out recently, and like, I forget what it is, but there's been, the movie that killed musicals, the movie that killed the epic drama, but it's stuff like that.
We might be getting to that point with superhero movies soon.
Well, I mean, musicals are so bad right now. Like, they didn't even advertise. If you look at the commercials for the last Mean Girls movie and the Willy Wonka movie, they do everything they can to not mention it's a musical.
Which is weird. I still need to see Wonka, but if I had known it was a musical, I would have been probably more interested. And same thing, like the Mean Girls movie, I was rolling my eyes, like, really, we're remaking this? And then once I realized it was a musical, I'm like, oh, okay.
Oh, like,
that's forgivable. It's like a different thing then.
Yeah, it's an adaptation of the stage play, but like, they literally didn't show any of the music in the movie. They didn't show any of in the trailer, they didn't show any of the dance sequences. The only thing that we got was that, I think, like, the A in Mean had a music note in it. That was all they would tell us. Like, it's like if you don't want to make musicals that bad, then just don't make them.
Right? It's weird too, because like, musicals a bit like La La Land.
La La Land was not a musical.
It was a musical. It just wasn't as good as everyone said it was. But like, my point is, you would think that it would have revived a little bit more. But we're getting off topic. I think we're at the point now where we're rating the film.
Before we rate really quick, I just wanted to speed read off, because I just want to give credit where credit's due.
Yes.
Here we go. So I have. Okay, so Creeps Peach Fuzz is an underrated horror villain on Screen Rants by Helen Armitage. We have Creep and the Horror of the Subtle Psychopath by Brendan Morrow from Bloody Disgusting. We had the Creep review from Variety from 2014 by Joe Layden. Then we had GiantFreakingRobot.com. Unnerving horror thriller that feels real on Netflix is guaranteed to get under your skin by Zach Zagrenis. And that was published only 5 months ago. So like people are still just discovering this movie and they're loving it still. Then we have Trust Your Gut, The Role of Conscience in Horror by Peyton Robinson from RogerEbert.com. And then we had Creep 10 Years Later, Why It Remains One of the Most Compelling Uses of Found Footage by Louise H.C. And then, of course, the IMDb page. So just want to get that out there really quick because I wanted to quote you guys more, but I also want to know that, except for my own theories, most of what I learned about this movie I learned from y'all's articles. That being said, Whiskey, what would you rate this movie?
Some people are probably going to hate me, especially since this seems to be so beloved. As I said, this seems to really resonate with some people. My sister really loved this. You obviously really loved this. I think the acting is fantastic. I think that the character of Joseph and Peach Fuzz I think he's iconic. I do agree with that. I think he's one of the best like horror killers ever. Yeah. Like I'd put him at least in the top 100, possibly narrow the list down to maybe 20 or something. But he's very memorable. Probably the most memorable thing about this. But because it's not very long, a lot of the stuff that you can really chew on is sort of, you making your own assumptions or speculations. So like it's just a very simple movie, and that does not work against it. But anyone who's listened to the show knows I kind of love to overthink things. So in that sense, like just again based on my own personal, I'm giving it a 2.5. But still, it's great. It's a great entertaining film. It's not overly long, and as I said, like I'm always recommending stuff for like filmmakers, but if you're an actor who listens to our show, I think this would be a really great thing to watch to like, learn from, like both like from improv and like creating a character yourself as an actor, not as a filmmaker.
Yeah.
I think this is a very useful film for that. So yeah, like it's still really good though. Obviously, and 2.5 out of 4 for anyone who's just tuned into our show. We do it out of 4 because we're making fun of Siskel and Ebert's stupid 4-star review thing. So 2.5 above average, but not amazing for me. How about you?
I'm gonna give it a 3 out of 4 pitchers of sweet tea. I didn't give it a 4 because, like you said, it is very simple, and as much as I like to speculate about what everybody's motives and everything are, I do wish they had given us just a bit more to chew on with the Peach Fuzz character, with him being so integral to the point they almost named the movie after him. I feel like I don't need to be, spoon-fed, an origin story. I just needed something more to chew on with its role and everything. And like I said, that's hard to do with the fact that a lot of this is improvised. That being said, it is a fantastic film. It is sort of I would almost say that it's, I wouldn't say it's a family horror film at all, but I would say it's almost like an intro to horror film. So you can kind of get into especially for psychological horror, the uncomfortableness and the discomfort and, and just focus on that without having to worry about other upsetting things. So I'm going to go ahead and give it a 3 out of 4. Really love it. Enjoy it. Watch it. It's on Netflix. But yeah, other than that, I think it's a great movie.
But what do any of you think? Do you think I was too harsh? Do you think T wasn't harsh enough? Do you think we should have had more whiskey or put some Benadryl in our whiskey?
That's what I was going to say.
To be more film accurate. Let us know in the comments if you're listening to this on YouTube, if you're listening to this on any of the other platforms we're on. Feel free to check out our backlog of episodes. We cover several genres. Hit us up on Threads or Twitter. We're always down to review films recommended by listeners. But yeah, until then, I've been Whiskey.
And I've been Sweet Tea.
Keeping it Kino.
And suck it, Scorsese.
All right.
Bye, y'all.
Bye, y'all.
Reels on the Rocks is a production of La Prince Laboratories. It is edited and produced by Alejandro Castillo.
and features original artwork by Asa Esparza and original music by Pat Mars. Follow us on Twitter at Reels on the Rocks, and tweet at us with any movies or topics you'd like us to discuss in the future.